You opened the betting app 20 minutes ago. You found a match. Some team you've never seen play against. Another team you've never seen play. Say it's Uzbekistan against whoever happens to be on the other side of the bracket. You don't know the manager's name. You can't place the capital without thinking about it for a second. You bet on them anyway. And here's the part that matters. You had reasons. Real ones, you felt. Something about their defensive structure. Something you read about the opponent struggling on the counter. The odds looked right. Everything pointed the same direction. You placed the bet like someone who'd done their homework. The World Cup just became a 48-team tournament. That's 16 more national squads than most people have ever watched play a competitive match. 16 more sets of odds. 16 more lines to have a read on, and the people who will bet on those teams with complete confidence, people who couldn't name a single player in the squad, are not a small group. You might be one of them. That's not an insult. It's just what happens to almost everyone, and there's a specific reason it keeps happening. Think about how the read actually formed. You watched maybe 12 minutes of highlights from Uzbekistan's qualifier. You saw them press high and win the ball back quickly in their own half. You noticed the striker drop deep to link play. The goalkeeper distributed well under pressure. 12 minutes. That's what you had. But those 12 minutes were enough. By the time you closed the tab, you already had a picture. You knew what kind of team they were, their shape, their rhythm, roughly how they'd hold up against a team that sits back. You'd formed an opinion the way you form opinions about teams you've watched for years, except the source material was 12 minutes of edited highlights someone else chose for you. Well, that's not unusual. That's most people watching most matches they bet on. A clip package, a scouting video that's already filtered, 3 paragraphs from a journalist who watched the full 90, a comment thread where 2 people agreed on something and it stuck. By the time the odds appear, the picture already feels complete. You know football. That part is true. You've watched it for years. You understand how pressing systems work, when a high line is a risk, what it means when a team can't hold the ball in transition. You've seen enough to know things. That knowledge is real. The problem is what the brain does with it. When you sat down to look at the match, your brain didn't say, I know football in general, but I know nothing about these 2 teams specifically. It said, I know football. Full stop. And that felt like enough. Psychologists call this the illusion of knowledge, the gap between what you actually know about a specific situation and what your general competence makes you feel entitled to judge. It's not arrogance, it's just how expertise works inside the head. The brain doesn't file knowledge by category, it stacks. And when you pull from the stack, it all feels the same weight. You brought 12 years of watching football to 12 minutes of highlights, and the combination felt like an informed opinion. It was mostly about football, only a little bit about Uzbekistan. There's something else going on during a World Cup that doesn't happen the rest of the year. Your group chat is betting. Your coworker mentioned a tip at lunch. Someone on the forum you follow put up a long post about Uzbekistan's XG in qualifying and got 400 upvotes. The guy next to you at the bar said the other team can't handle pace, and he said it with the kind of certainty that only comes from either knowing a lot or knowing nothing. When everyone around you is betting with conviction, something shifts. Your own uncertainty gets quieter. Not because new information arrived, because the social environment stopped reflecting uncertainty back at you. Everyone else seems sure. That reads as a signal, and the brain treats social consensus as evidence, because for most of human history, that was a reasonable shortcut. If everyone in the group agreed that the berries on that bush were safe, they were probably safe. The collective red was usually worth trusting. That shortcut doesn't work in a betting market. In a betting market, everyone's certainty is equally uninformed, and the odds already account for the crowd's opinion. The consensus isn't evidence. It's noise that feels like evidence because it's coming from people you trust. But by the time you open the app, you've absorbed that noise for 3 days. And it's made you more certain, not less. In 1977, Ellen Langer ran a series of experiments at Harvard on what she called, the illusion of control. She had people play a simple card game against opponents who were either confident and well-dressed or visibly nervous and uncertain. Same cards, same odds, different opponent. Against the nervous opponent, people bet more. They played more aggressively. They acted like their skill could affect the outcome. Even in a game where skill doesn't affect anything, the opponent's appearance changed nothing. The deck was the deck, but the environment sent a signal that said, "You have an edge here," and people responded to it like it was real. Now, think about what happens to you in the days before a World Cup match between two teams you barely know. Every platform is full of content. Journalists are breaking down Uzbekistan's defensive shape. Someone made a video about the opponent's set-piece weakness. The odds have moved, and you noticed which direction. You've read the comments. You've absorbed predictions from people who watch full matches, people who watch no matches, and people who watch the same 12 minutes you did. All of it registers the same way. All of it feels like signal. That feeling of saturation reads like expertise. It isn't. But from the inside, the two feel identical. And I know what you're thinking. You did actual research. You looked things up. This wasn't just vibes. That part is true. You did research. The question is, when you started. You leaned toward Uzbekistan in about 40 seconds. Then you opened 3 tabs to confirm it. You found 2 analysts who agreed with you, skimmed past 2 who didn't, and by the time you placed the bet, you'd assembled a small file of evidence for a decision you'd already made. That's not research. That's prosecution. Psychologist Raymond Nickerson spent years compiling studies on this. His 1998 paper in the Review of General Psychology, called Confirmation Bias, perhaps the most significant source of flawed reasoning in human judgment. Not because people are careless, but because the brain moves fast. It builds a model, then looks for things that fit the model. Contradictions take longer to process. They slow you down, so the brain quietly skips them. You didn't notice the analyst you scrolled past. That's the whole point. The skipping is automatic. There's one more layer. You've done this before. Bet on a team you didn't know, and you remember the times it worked. The match where you called it. The one where you watched a team you'd never heard of, and they played exactly the way you said they would. You told someone about it afterward. It became a story. The losses dissolve. Not because you're dishonest, because the brain doesn't store boring information. A win on an obscure team is interesting. A loss is a Tuesday, so your internal track record on these bets looks significantly better than your actual track record. Every time you go back to it, you're drawing on a memory that's been quietly edited. So here's what was actually happening in the 20 minutes before you placed the bet. You weren't analyzing Uzbekistan. You were building a story where you were the person who saw something other people missed, the asymmetric read, the value nobody else noticed. Each piece of information wasn't data. It was a brick in that story, and the story felt good before the match even started. That's not an accident. Wolfram Schultz spent years mapping dopamine responses and found that the brain's reward system fires hardest not when you win, but when something signals that you might win. The anticipation, the open bet, the match still 90 minutes away and everything's still possible. The bet is the product. The match is just what closes it. Uzbekistan lose. They actually tie it up for a few minutes in the second half. You watch the equalizer live, and for about 5 minutes it looks like your read was right. Then Colombia scored twice more before the final whistle. You didn't model the substitutions. You sit with it for a moment. You go back over the second goal in your head. You think about an analyst you half read who mentioned Colombia's bench depth, and you remember scrolling past it because it didn't fit what you'd already decided. That's an uncomfortable 30 seconds. Then you close the tab. You open the next fixture on the card. Some other team you've never watched against an opponent you happen to know a little better. The odds look good, and you actually know something about this one. You watched them play once a few years back. You remember their shape. You already know what you're going to do. The loss didn't change the red. It barely touched it. Colombia had more in the tank late. That's just depth. That doesn't say anything about the analysis. The read was right. The execution just went against you. The brain found that explanation in about 4 seconds. It always does. Because if the story falls apart, the next bet becomes harder to place. So it cleans it up every time without asking. Have you ever actually tracked your record on these? Written down every bet on a team you didn't know, win and loss, both? Or do you just remember the ones that went right?